They had the looks, the talent, the roles that others could only dream of. In an industry that devours its own, they had already made it past the teeth. And yet they fell. Not because Hollywood turned its back on them, not because the press hunted them down, not because of one explosive scandal that killed a career overnight, but because something inside them, some quiet war of doubt, pride, or pain, began to rot the foundation before the spotlight ever faded. These are not stories of victims. They are stories of self-sabotage, of stars who saw the throne, sat on it briefly, then set it on fire. Behind every camera flash, there was a whisper, "She could have had it all if only she hadn't." Behind every closed dressing room door, a question, what made him walk away when the world begged him to stay? This is not a tribute. It's a post-mortem, an autopsy of ambition, of voices too fragile for fame, of brilliance that burned too hot to last, of people who could conquer roles, but not themselves. Because sometimes, Hollywood doesn't need to destroy you. You do it better than they ever could. Hasson. Montgomery Clift, the face that couldn't be forgiven. Montgomery Clift didn't fade away. He imploded slowly, painfully, and in full view of the world. By the late 1940 seconds, Clift was Hollywood's answer to Brando before Brando even arrived. With a face sculpted like tragedy and eyes that seemed permanently on the verge of apology, he redefined what it meant to be a leading man, vulnerable, wounded, devastatingly real. Films like A Place in the Sun and From Here to Eternity turned him into both icon and enigma. But behind that beauty was a man at war with himself, haunted by his sexuality, tortured by perfectionism, and consumed by self-loathing. Clift walked through fame like it was a sentence. He didn't chase publicity, he avoided it like a disease. He second-guessed every role, every line reading, every frame. Then came the crash. In 1956, a car accident disfigured the most recognizable face in Hollywood. His jaw was broken, his nose shattered. But the real damage wasn't physical, it was psychological. Clift couldn't forgive what he saw in the mirror, not because the face was ruined, but because it was no longer his. He kept acting, but the performances became ghostly. He was there, but not really. He was delivering lines, but never fully arrived. Studios didn't exile Clift. He stayed on the guest list. But emotionally, he had already left the party. Was it the accident that ended him or the guilt he carried long before the crash? #2. Judy Holliday. Brilliant, terrified, gone. Judy Holliday could outwit anyone in the room, she just didn't want them to know it. With her dizzy blonde persona perfected in Born Yesterday, she became the poster child for cute but clueless. Audiences loved her. Studios marketed her, and behind the scenes, she was memorizing entire screenplays in one sitting and carrying conversations in multiple languages. But Holliday didn't trust fame. She didn't trust success. Most of all, she didn't trust the world with her real self. Plagued by anxiety and a deep-rooted fear of being found out as too smart, too opinionated, or too complicated, Judy carefully crafted a mask she could hide behind. It worked, but it worked too well. The industry locked her inside the very box she had built. Then came the blacklist era. Though never proven to be a communist, her associations and silence were enough to land her under FBI scrutiny. Instead of fighting, she recoiled. She withdrew from the stage, from film, from opportunity. At a time when others clawed their way back, she folded quietly. By the time the spotlight was hers again, the hunger was gone. Or maybe the fear had won. She died young, just 43, from cancer. But in truth, her retreat began long before her body gave out. Holliday didn't self-destruct loudly. She simply backed away, step by step, until the curtain closed. Was she protecting her soul, or letting fear take the final bow for her? #3. Richard Harris, the poet who drowned in his own liquor. Richard Harris had the voice of a Shakespearean god and the soul of a street brawler. He could recite Yeats by heart, deliver Hamlet with thunder, and drink everyone under the table before the second act. In the 1960 seconds, Harris wasn't just a star, he was a force. Films like This Sporting Life and Camelot made him a romantic anti-hero, a rogue with depth, a rebel with something worth saying. He was Irish to the bone, charming, furious, and untamed. But Harris believed destruction was a kind of authenticity, sobriety, restraint, control. These were things for men who feared life, not for men like him. He chased chaos like it owed him something, and he drank. He drank through roles, through friendships, through decades. He insulted producers, missed flights, alienated directors. He turned down roles others would kill for, burned bridges others hadn't even crossed yet. By the time the 1980 seconds rolled around, Harris was a ghost of his former self, bloated, volatile, his genius buried under layers of scorn and scotch. His talent never left. It simply drowned under the weight of his own legend. He would make a late comeback briefly as Dumbledore in Harry Potter. But even then, the twinkle was dimmer, the fire more controlled. The Wildman had grown tired of the wilderness. Did he drink to become more alive, or because he knew he never truly was? #4. George C. Scott, the general who refused to march. George C. Scott had the presence of a battlefield, loud, commanding, impossible to ignore. His performance as General Patton didn't just win him the Academy Award, it engraved him into cinematic history as a titan of American masculinity. But George C. Scott hated the idea of being a legend. When the Academy gave him the Oscar in 1971, he refused it. Not as a stunt, not as a protest, but because he believed acting was not a competition and awards were meat parades. He called the entire process dehumanizing, grotesque. It wasn't false modesty, it was defiance. And it didn't stop there. Scott turned down roles that were too easy. He walked out of sets mid-production. He refused to play the game of press tours, studio dinners, or anything that smelled of celebrity culture. While other stars smoothed their rough edges to fit the mold, Scott sharpened his. He was a genius, but prickly. A commanding actor, but a difficult collaborator. And Hollywood, which once bowed before his authority, began to look elsewhere toward younger, more cooperative talent. His career never vanished, but it narrowed, not because of scandal, because of his own terms. Scott believed in the art, not the circus. But in rejecting the machine, he also rejected the platform that allowed his genius to shine. Was he preserving his dignity, or hiding from the very fame he knew would distort him? #5. Gene Tierney, too perfect to survive herself. Gene Tierney was the kind of beautiful that didn't seem real. On screen, she was flawless, icy, elegant, untouchable. In Laura and Leave Her to Heaven, she didn't just play the role of perfection, she embodied it. But perfection is a heavy costume to wear. And for Tierney, it was suffocating. Behind the surface was a woman unraveling. In the early 1940 seconds, while pregnant, Tierney made a public appearance to support the war effort. One fan, infected with rubella, broke quarantine to meet her. Tierney's child was born deaf, partially blind, and severely disabled. The guilt was instant and permanent. She kept working. She smiled. She posed. But something inside her began to crack. As the years passed, Tierney battled severe depression. She underwent multiple stays in psychiatric clinics. One of them involved shock therapy so extreme, she later claimed it robbed her of years of memory. Her image remained pristine. Her mind, however, did not. Hollywood didn't exile her. In fact, it kept calling. But Tierney increasingly stepped away, not in scandal, but in silent collapse. She returned briefly in the 1960 seconds. Older, wiser, quieter. The roles were smaller. The pain, still enormous. Was Gene Tierney a victim of fate, of Hollywood, or simply of the impossible pressure to be a woman so perfect no one believed she could break? #6. Dorothy Dandridge, trapped between spotlight and silence. Dorothy Dandridge walked into rooms that were never meant for her and lit them up anyway. She was the first black woman nominated for a Best Actress Oscar. In Carmen Jones, she wasn't just a revelation, she was a revolution. Graceful, magnetic, defiant. For a moment, Hollywood seemed ready to rewrite its rules. But moments pass, and systems don't break easily. After Carmen Jones, the offers should have poured in. Instead, they trickled, and most were stereotypes. Slave girls, exotic temptresses. She refused them. She demanded more, but the industry wasn't ready for more. Not from her. So she waited, and while she waited, her life unraveled. She married badly, loved recklessly, and trusted people who saw her as a paycheck. Her finances were drained. Her daughter was institutionalized. Roles disappeared. By the 1960 seconds, the woman once hailed as the future of cinema was performing in nightclubs just to survive. Dandridge didn't crash in a scandal. She crashed in silence, alone, in her apartment, from a drug overdose, possibly accidental, possibly not. No one really knows. She had opened a door no one else dared touch, but the room on the other side was empty. Was Dorothy destroyed by racism or by the unbearable weight of being the first, with no one waiting to catch her? #7. Dean Martin, the man who vanished in plain sight. Dean Martin was the kind of cool that didn't try. It just was. Whether crooning beside Frank Sinatra or trading insults with Jerry Lewis, Martin seemed untouchable, half-lidded, drink in hand, always one step removed from the chaos around him. He was the king of effortless charm, But behind the haze of cocktails and comedy was a man carefully building distance from the world. Martin didn't just play the role of the aloof outsider, he lived it. And the deeper his fame grew, the more he drifted. He split from Jerry Lewis at the peak of their partnership, not in rage, but in indifference. He distanced himself from the Rat Pack even as they embraced him as family. And when tragedy struck like the death of his son in a plane crash, Martin didn't cry publicly, he shut down. In the final decades of his life, Martin became a ghost within his own legacy. He stopped performing, he avoided reunions, he declined tributes. He walked the streets of Beverly Hills in silence, refusing autographs, fading without fanfare. There were no tabloid meltdowns, no exposés, just a man who quietly chose to retreat, long before the world was ready to let him go. Did Dean Martin vanish because he'd had enough of the spotlight, or because he was never really in it to begin with? Hashite. Faye Dunaway, the queen who demanded too much. Faye Dunaway didn't rise in Hollywood, she stormed it. From Bonnie and Clyde to Network to Chinatown, she didn't just play women on the edge, she was the edge. Sharp, unpredictable, dangerously poised. Her performances weren't safe, they were combustible. Critics compared her to Garbo, to Crawford, to Hepburn, but Dunaway wasn't interested in becoming anyone but herself, and that was the problem. Behind the screen, Dunaway demanded everything: control, perfection, reverence. Directors called her difficult. Crews whispered that she was impossible. She clashed with Roman Polanski, feuded with studio executives, and reportedly threw things on set when things didn't go her way. But was she actually difficult or simply unwilling to be tamed? In a town where male actors were celebrated for obsession and volatility, Dunaway was labeled hysterical. After her Oscar win for Network, the roles didn't rise, they withered. She was too intense, too controlling, too everything. Then came Mommy Dearest. Her portrayal of Joan Crawford was meant to be her next masterpiece. Instead, it became a punchline, and with it, Hollywood turned on her. The phone stopped ringing. Dunaway never vanished completely, but her second act never came. Not because she lacked the fire, but because she had too much of it, in a world that didn't want to be burned. Was Faye Dunaway punished for being a perfectionist or for refusing to apologize for it? Rauten Oin. Klaus Kinski, Madness, magnified. Klaus Kinski didn't act, he erupted. His performances in films like Aguirre, The Wrath of God, and Nosferatu, the Vampire weren't performances at all. They were manifestations. He didn't play characters, he became them. Unstable, obsessive, haunted. You couldn't look away. But the same volcanic energy that made him unforgettable on screen made him unbearable off it. Directors feared him. Crews loathed him. His legendary collaborations with Werner Herzog were less partnerships than psychological duels. Herzog himself claimed he once plotted to kill Kinski. Kinski, in return, allegedly fired a rifle at crew members during filming. And that wasn't the worst of it. His rages were not artistic quirks, they were nuclear meltdowns. He was accused of violence, of terrorizing sets, of destroying lives around him with manic unpredictability. Yet producers kept calling. They were willing to endure the madness for one more moment of cinematic brilliance. But Kinski didn't care about legacy. He didn't care about careers. He barely seemed to care about reality. He alienated everyone, including his own children, some of whom would later speak of abuse and torment. He burned every bridge, then danced in the smoke. And when he died in 1991, he left behind a filmography that still fascinates and a reputation too toxic to mourn without pause. Was Klaus Kinski a genius lost to madness, or did he weaponize madness to protect himself from the world? Hasson Zero. Vivien Leigh, trapped in her own masterpiece. Vivien Leigh won the world's adoration with a single role and spent the rest of her life trying to survive it. Gone with the Wind made her immortal. As Scarlett O'Hara, she was cunning, radiant, ruthless, every frame, a portrait of controlled chaos. But the control was an illusion. Behind the scenes, Leigh was already losing her grip. She battled bipolar disorder at a time when no one dared speak its name. Her swings between euphoria and despair were extreme, sometimes violent. She would charm a room into silence, then collapse into weeping fits backstage. Laurence Olivier, her husband and co-star, adored her brilliance but grew exhausted by the emotional wreckage it left in its wake. As her illness deepened, so did the disconnect between her screen image and her private reality. She was too volatile for certain roles, too delicate for others. Directors began to hesitate. As studios pulled back. Still, she kept fighting, returning to the stage, accepting difficult roles, insisting she could manage. But the fight was lonely and losing. By the 1,960 seconds, her health had deteriorated. Her Her marriage had ended. Her fame remained, but it hovered like a ghost, unreachable, unkind. She died at 53, forever remembered as Scarlett, forever misunderstood as Vivien. Did Vivien Leigh lose herself in a role, or did the world refuse to see the woman beyond the myth? Hassanon. Peter Sellers, the man with no face of his own. Peter Sellers could be anyone except himself. He was Clouseau, Chance the Gardener, Dr. Strangelove. He slipped into personas like second skins, vanishing behind accents, wigs, and masks. No two roles were the same, and yet each bore the same haunting question. Who was he when the cameras stopped? Sellers wasn't just a chameleon, he was a void. Off-screen, friends described him as erratic, insecure, unreachable. He once claimed there was no Peter Sellers, only the characters he played. And perhaps he wasn't lying. He craved love but destroyed relationships. He longed for artistic control, but sabotaged his own projects. He demanded perfection, then drowned in self-doubt when he achieved it. At the height of his fame, he manipulated directors, feuded with producers, and alienated almost everyone who tried to help him. Behind the genius was a man tormented by loneliness. He believed he was dying constantly, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and in some ways, he was. Each role took a piece of him. Each performance added to a portrait that had no center. By the time being there earned him critical resurrection, he was already fading. A heart attack ended his life at 54, though many would say the erosion had started long before. Was Peter Sellers a genius without identity, or a man so afraid of being known that he chose to be everyone else instead? Hassanon 2. Veronica Lake. The hair that hid a storm. Veronica Lake didn't just appear on screen, she drifted through it like smoke. With her iconic peak, a boo hairstyle, and sultry stare, she became a symbol of 1,940 seconds noir femininity. Men adored her, women copied her, and studios cashed in on every frame. But the image that made her famous was also the prison that kept her small. Beneath the hair was a woman coming apart. Lake struggled with undiagnosed mental illness, often described in the era as difficult or temperamental. She clashed with co-stars, bristled at authority, and made enemies in the studio system that had once crowned her. When her popularity began to fade, there was no safety net, no second act. Her marriages failed, her finances collapsed, roles dried up, and eventually, so did the spotlight. She took a job as a barmaid in a hotel, serving drinks to people who barely recognized her. When reporters tracked her down in the 1,960 seconds, they were stunned. The femme fatale was pouring beer in faded clothes, sarcastic and unapologetic. She didn't beg for sympathy. She didn't try to rewrite her legacy. She simply existed, stripped of glamour, refusing to pretend. When she died of hepatitis at 50, it barely made headlines. The world had already forgotten her, but her face, half hidden, half haunted, still lingers. Did Veronica Lake vanish because Hollywood discarded her, or because she was never willing to be what they demanded for long? Hassanon 3. Jean Seberg, the idealist who became the target. Jean Seberg was supposed to be America's answer to Joan of Arc, literally. At 17, she was plucked from obscurity to play the saint in Otto Preminger's Saint Joan. But instead of launching a legend, the film nearly destroyed her. Critics tore her apart. Audiences winced. Seberg, barely out of high school, was humiliated on a global stage. She could have faded right then, but she didn't. She crossed the Atlantic, reinvented herself in French cinema, and became the cool, radiant face of the French New Wave. Breathless turned her into a symbol of modern rebellion. And yet, Seberg remained restlessly political, fiercely idealistic. She didn't want to just act, she wanted to matter. That's what made her dangerous. In the late 1,960 seconds, she supported civil rights groups in the US, including the Black Panthers. That alone was enough to make her a target. The FBI launched a smear campaign, planting false stories in the press, most infamously, that she was pregnant with a Black Panther's child. The rumor devastated her. The baby died. And something inside Seberg broke for good. She battled paranoia, depression, and a sense that she was being watched because she was. Her career suffered. Her trust in people evaporated. In 1979, she was found dead in her car. Overdose, suicide, surveillance clippings still in the glove box. Did Jean Seberg destroy herself, or did the machinery of fear do it for her? Hassanon 4. John Barrymore, the tragedy behind the talent. Before there was Brando, before there was Olivier, there was John Barrymore. He was the original American acting royalty, possessing the kind of stage presence that could silence a theater and the kind of face that made early cinema camera lenses fall in love. Dubbed the Great Profile, Barrymore conquered both Broadway and Hollywood with ease, but what he couldn't conquer was himself. Behind the bravado was a man terrified of fading, a man addicted to brilliance and to the bottle. Barrymore drank like he was trying to forget something no one else could see. As his fame soared, so did the chaos. He arrived on sets drunk. He slurred through scenes. He forgot lines he once delivered with thunderous command. The myth of his genius endured even as the evidence began to crumble. And still, he joked about it, turning his decline into performance art. He was the great has-been before anyone coined the phrase. Friends called him tragic. Barrymore called himself irrelevant. By the end, his name carried more weight than his body. He died in 1942, penniless and wrecked. Some say his drinking was a symptom. Others say it was the cause. But maybe John Barrymore knew the truth, that when the world worships your talent more than your soul, it's only a matter of time before you drink to forget the difference. Was Barrymore undone by excess or by the fear that his best self was always a performance? Hasson 4. John Barrymore, the tragedy behind the talent. Before there was Brando, before there was Olivier, there was John Barrymore. He was the original American acting royalty, possessing the kind of stage presence that could silence a theater and the kind of face that made early cinema camera lenses fall in love. Dubbed the Great Profile, Barrymore conquered both Broadway and Hollywood with ease. But what he couldn't conquer was himself. Behind the bravado was a man terrified of fading, a man addicted to brilliance and to the bottle. Barrymore drank like he was trying to forget something no one else could see. As his fame soared, so did the chaos. He arrived on sets drunk. He slurred through scenes. He forgot lines he once delivered with thunderous command. The myth of his genius endured even as the evidence began to crumble. And still, he joked about it, turning his decline into performance art. He was the great has-been before anyone coined the phrase. Friends called him tragic. Barrymore called himself irrelevant. By the end, his name carried more weight than his body. He died in 1942, penniless and wrecked. Some say his drinking was a symptom, others say it was the cause. But maybe John Barrymore knew the truth, that when the world worships your talent more than your soul, it's only a matter of time before you drink to forget the difference. Was Barrymore undone by excess or by the fear that his best self was always a performance? Hashonix, Shelley Duvall, the woman who couldn't escape the frame. Shelley Duvall had the kind of presence that didn't just fill the screen, it made it uneasy. Awkward, ethereal, almost otherworldly, she wasn't the Hollywood norm. And that's what made her unforgettable. Robert Altman saw it, Stanley Kubrick demanded it, and the world watched her in The Shining, unraveling in real time. But what the audience didn't see or didn't want to confront was that Duvall wasn't acting. During the months-long shoot, Kubrick subjected her to psychological pressure so extreme that her hair began falling out. He isolated her from the cast, ordered over 100 takes of emotionally draining scenes, and dismissed her pain as performance prep. The result was iconic. The cost was permanent. Duvall never fully recovered. She continued to work, but something had shifted. Her performances became more erratic. Her spark, once odd and magnetic, seemed dimmed. By the late 90 seconds, she had all but vanished from Hollywood. Interviews stopped. Offers dried up. Rumors spread. Years later, she reappeared in a televised interview that drew criticism for its voyeuristic tone. The woman on screen seemed lost, fragile, broken, and suddenly, the world that had once praised her vulnerability on camera had to confront the consequences of exploiting it. She wasn't just a quirky actress, she was a casualty. Did Shelley Duvall walk away from Hollywood, or did Hollywood strip her bare and leave her nowhere else to go? Hasson 7. Shia LaBeouf, too aware to survive the spotlight. Shia LaBeouf didn't stumble into fame, he sprinted into it, wild-eyed and defiant. From Disney Channel stardom to box office blockbusters like Transformers, he was Hollywood's strange golden boy, raw, reactive, irresistible. But Shia didn't fit the mold. He studied performance art, quoted Bukowski, and treated fame like a science experiment he hated being part of. He called acting the most dishonest thing you can do. Then he built a career on doing it honestly. LaBeouf didn't just self-sabotage, he did it with intention. He wore a paper bag on his head at premieres, screamed at police, got arrested, made apology videos that were more performance than penitence. He turned his trauma into theater, and then dared the world to look away. But underneath the provocations was a man visibly in pain. He spoke of childhood abuse, of deep-seated rage, of never being enough. Directors praised his intensity, but few could handle his volatility. Collaborators came and went, lawsuits followed. So did admissions of emotional abuse, addiction, and spirals of shame. Yet even in chaos, LaBeouf kept creating, writing, directing, acting in indie films that blurred the line between therapy and self-destruction. His talent was never the question. The real question was whether his inner war would ever pause long enough for him to find peace. Is Shia LaBeouf an artist unraveling in public, or a man too smart, too wounded, and too restless to stay safely within the system? Hasson 8. Mickey Rourke, the star who fought himself first. Mickey Rourke didn't just have talent, he had danger. In the 1,980 seconds, he was poised to become the next great American actor. With Diner, Rumblefish, and 9.5 Weeks, Rourke delivered performances that were electric, unpredictable, and intensely human. He wasn't just acting, he was bearing something raw, something few others dared touch. But Mickey didn't want to be a movie star. He wanted to be a fighter literally and figuratively. As his fame climbed, so did his refusal to play by the rules. He insulted producers, walked out on roles, and trashed his own performances in the press. Then, at the peak of his career, he left Hollywood altogether to become a professional boxer. It wasn't a phase, it was self-erasure. The boxing ring didn't just batter his body, it mangled his face. A few years later, when Rourke tried to return to acting, he was almost unrecognizable. The surgeries didn't help, the roles dried up, and the world that once saw a smoldering icon now saw a cautionary tale. Then came The Wrestler, a comeback so powerful it felt biblical. But even that couldn't hold him for long. Old patterns returned, so did the fights. And Rourke remains what he's always been, brilliant, broken, and unrepentantly himself. Did Mickey Rourke throw away his career, or did he destroy it before someone else could? Hasson, River Phoenix, the flame that knew it was burning out. River Phoenix wasn't built for Hollywood. He was too fragile, too principled, too awake. From Stand By Me to My Own Private Idaho, he delivered performances that felt lived in, never acted. He didn't chase fame, he tried to dodge it. A vegan environmentalist who hated interviews, he treated acting like a burden and a responsibility. His roles weren't about ego, they were about truth. But truth carries weight, and Phoenix carried too much. He grew up too fast. The pressure to support his family, to stay morally uncompromised in an industry built on compromise, it hollowed him. While the world projected sainthood onto his image, he privately struggled with addiction, insomnia, and an identity splintered by expectations. He didn't party for pleasure, he used to numb, to escape, to breathe in a system that never let him exhale. On the 31st of October 1993, he collapsed outside the Viper Room in Los Angeles. His brother Joaquin called 911. He was 23. The autopsy confirmed what most already suspected: heroin, cocaine, Valium, a toxic cocktail that silenced a voice meant to echo for decades. River Phoenix didn't crash and burn. He simply ran out of oxygen. Was River destroyed by the pressure of purity, or by a world that wanted his light but never cared how long it could last? #20. Lindsay Lohan, the modern tragedy in real time. Lindsay Lohan didn't grow into fame, she was born inside of it. By the time she was 10, she had already modeled for Calvin Klein and appeared in dozens of commercials. The Parent Trap made her a star. Mean Girls made her a cultural icon. She wasn't just talented, she was electric, natural, effortless. And then she unraveled. But not in private. Not behind closed doors. Lohan's fall was televised, photographed, memed, dissected, DUIs, rehab, courtrooms, mugshots. She became the punchline to her own cautionary tale. The industry didn't just turn on her, it documented her downfall like it was part of the script. And yet, behind the headlines was a girl raised by chaos, an exploitative family, fame before identity, a system that handed her adoration before she learned how to process rejection. She wasn't spoiled, she was shaped by a spotlight that never blinked. Every time she tried to return through music, film, reality shows, she was met not with curiosity, but with ridicule, as if the world had already written her ending. But Lohan never fully vanished. She didn't implode like other child stars. She lingered, and that, in itself, might be the tragedy. Because in an age of second chances, Lindsay Lohan remains a living artifact of what happens when fame feeds on someone too young to say no. Did Lindsay fall apart, or was she dismantled, piece by piece, in front of a laughing crowd? Bonus star, Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, the prince who couldn't save himself. Jonathan Rhys-Meyers had the look of royalty and the rawness of a street poet. In Velvet Goldmine, Match Point, and the tutors. He didn't just act, he radiated attention that was both magnetic and combustible. Directors loved his intensity. Audiences couldn't look away. He was poised to become one of the defining actors of his generation. But the darkness never stayed on screen. Myers struggled openly with alcoholism, not in whispered rumors but in airports, hotel lobbies, and police reports. Rehab became routine, apologies were issued, comebacks attempted, but the cycle didn't break. With each tabloid headline, the narrative grew tighter, brilliant but broken, talented but troubled. And the tragedy was never melodramatic. It was quiet, lingering, real. He lost roles, he lost trust, he lost time. But he never lost the ache to return to prove he still had more to give. And when he did reappear, he was often brilliant. Still capable of that eerie, magnetic control. Still walking the tightrope between elegance and implosion. Myers is still alive, still acting, still fighting. But his story remains a sobering reminder. Not all falls are final, and not all comebacks come with applause. Is Jonathan Rhys Myers a tragedy unfolding or a redemption the world gave up on too soon? Hollywood is often blamed for what it destroys, but sometimes the ruin comes from within, from quiet wounds, unspoken fears, or fires no one else can see. These weren't cautionary tales, they were people who soared too high on talent, only to find that brilliance without balance can be its own undoing. Some of them vanished, some of them fought back, some are still walking among us, carrying the weight of stories they never got to finish. But now, the spotlight turns to you. Which of these stars do you think could have been saved, and which ones were always writing their own final act? Let us know in the comments. Sometimes the most haunting endings are the ones we never saw coming.